Let's do it. Welcome, everybody.
All right.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of my two partners, Bill and Trevor Kimball, I want to say welcome and thank you for being here. We are ever mindful of the various options that are available to you as dentists in the dental industry and the options that you have for exit. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about those. I think there's a lot of not so good information out there that hopefully we can clarify and make good information for you so you can make good informed choices as you plan your future and your retirement. And there's no one better to discuss this topic, I think, than our one and only Trevor Kimball. And so I'll hand the time over to him to take it from there.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to go through this show with everybody. Darren just did the intro here, but I'm Trevor Kimball. I'm a partner with Bill and Darren at Integrity Practice Sales. And we're very excited to be hosting this webinar this morning. We've been in the industry doing practice sales for at least 11 or 12 years now. In the last 2 years, I think we've done over 150 transactions. So we're very active in the market and excited to share some great information with you today. Today, I would like to take a look at dental market trends in 2024 and beyond, key accounting concepts for dental practice sales, comparing 3 different practice sales models, and identifying the best options for you in your practice. So in the next 50 minutes, we're going to go over those 4 things. And I hope that you have a much clearer picture of what the options available to you are, and just a better understanding of the landscape in general. Like Darren was saying, there's a lot of misinformation or information that's not even misinformation, but it's confusing information. And so I also
it seems like everybody's getting mailers these days from DSOs, and everybody's getting options, and there's a lot of confusion out there. And we've presented this webinar a couple times, and we're getting really good feedback. So well done, Trevor.
Thanks. Also, a brief disclaimer. I love details. I'm a nuanced guy. Let's get it exactly right. And today I'm going to be taking the 30,000-foot view. I want to give you a clear picture. I want you to understand your kind of major options and some of the major differences between them. But I am going to oversimplify some things. So it makes me feel better to say this up front. And if you want to carry on this conversation with me, I would love to do that with you. And the other option you have is to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be something that says Q&A. Feel free to post questions. Bill will be fielding the questions, and yeah, very excited about that. So let's have a conversation this morning. It's Casual Friday, so let's make it conversational, but I'm super excited. So let's get into it. Also, in order to spice up today's presentation, instead of going for your standard stock photography, I decided to tap into the fever dream of artificial intelligence and let ChatGPT generate most of the images for today's session. So I asked it to generate an image of a dentist contemplating the macroeconomic conditions, and here you have it, teeth in a graph. All right, so there's just 2 macroeconomic trends that I want to highlight in today's webinar very briefly, but I think it's worth noting kind of the large-scale environment. So the first is inflation. This was obviously the big news story of the last 24 months, 36 months even. Inflation skyrocketed between May 2020 down here and June 2022 up here. And this blue line here is the 2% target that the Federal Reserve is aiming for. And so as you can see, I'll leave the causes of this. That's a topic for another webinar. But as you can see, the data that the Fed uses to measure inflation, those indicators have been trending down and in the correct direction. And so I think it's good to note that there was obviously a big spike right here, but for whatever reason, it's coming back down. And so I think that it seems like the economy is stabilizing. Inflation matters, not just because you're paying more for supplies in your office or you're paying more at the grocery store, but it also affects interest rates. The Fed uses interest rates as a tool to bring down inflation and cool down the economy. And so here you see, in response to that inflation, a subsequent rise in interest rates right there. And I've heard so much from doctors, especially younger doctors who've grown up in this incredible low rate environment for the last 10 years, right here, that, oh my gosh, these interest rates seem insane. It's so high. And so the first thing I want to say is, let's look at this historical context. This graph actually goes back to the 50s here. And if you take a look at the last 70 years of interest rates, you'll note that this 5% is actually pretty average. That's not a huge jump one way or another. In a large-scale historical context, this 5% is normal. And I'll highlight the last slide again. But if we look here, because inflation is coming down, there are some good signs that the Fed will actually be lowering interest rates again this coming year. So that is hopefully not going to have the big effect on buyers' purchasing power that we might expect. So what does this mean for dental lending? Because I want to put this in the context of the dental industry specifically. And these are very important, I think, for specifically the loans that dentists are getting. We're talking about interest rates, we're talking about loans. So what loans are available to young dentists today? Firstly, good ones. Banks are still lending far more than they would for a home, right? 100% of the value of the practice plus working capital. Now, every lending decision is a function of both the practice and the buyer. So you might have an amazing practice, but the buyer won't qualify because they have a poor credit score or no liquidity or some other reason. Or it could be that it's a great buyer and it's a good practice, but the buyer has some pretty significant cash flow requirements. They have a lot of student loan debt. They just bought a house. So they need significant cash flow in order to make this deal work. And this practice doesn't provide enough cash flow to make this work. So it's always buyer and seller together. But when we make that match, when we get that right fit, banks are absolutely lending 100% plus working capital. And another confusion that I hear a lot is, man, these mortgage interest rates are insane. They're so high. The dentists themselves, when you go to get a loan, it's not going to be as high as a mortgage interest rate. Why? Very simply, the banks consider dentists better risks than your average home buyer. And so if the mortgage interest rate is up here, typically we're going to see a point or two below that, a percentage point or two below that for dentists. So if you're buying a practice, the bank thinks that's a great idea. They're more keen on lending you money. They're happy to lend you the full amount, and they consider that less risky than your average homeowner buying a home. So I think those are some tailwinds for dentists looking to get into private practice today. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of the macro conditions, let's talk about the dental market specifically. And here I have asked ChatGPT to come up with an image of a dentist thinking even more intensely about the state of the dental practice sales market in 2024. So today I want to highlight two major trends in the actual dental practice market. The first is that fewer doctors own practices or are owning practices. And the second is that more doctors will retire in the next few years. So let's look at these two together. And I mean, you've probably seen headlines or different news articles and things about these trends. And so I want to dig into the data just a little bit and hopefully provide some great clarity on what exactly this means, what it actually looks like, such that fewer doctors are owning practices or more doctors are retiring, and how that's going to shape the dental practice market in 2024 and for a few years to come. So firstly, let's look at practice ownership. This information, almost all the data I'm pulling from, comes from the American Dental Association's Health Policy Institute. It's a great resource. Highly recommend checking out their white papers, their data. But in this instance, I do want to highlight the definition of private practice, because we tend to think of private practice maybe opposite a corporate dental group or a DSO or something like that. The way the ADA is using private practice here is a non-governmental, or you don't work at a dental school, you don't work for a community health clinic or for the military or in prisons. Those are all considered public practice. And then over here, you have private practice. So privately held practices, whether that's owned by a single dentist who owns one location, or owned by a corporation that has 20, 30, 2,000 locations. So that's private practice. So right here, we're seeing that in 2005, almost 85% of dentists own practice. 85% of dentists in private practice, so non-governmental, non-school, they were owners. And today that number is only 72.5%. Now, given the headlines in practice ownership declining, I absolutely want to respect the trend line. There's a trend going down, but 72% is a pretty huge number, to be honest. I mean, that's almost
Sounds like
surprising to
most.
me. Yeah.
Sounds like most.
It's a significant number. So 72% today are owners. Yes, the trend is going down, but I don't think it's going to go down forever. And there's absolutely going to be a place for private practice ownership for a long, long, long time to come. So 84%, 84.7, basic 85 to 80, 73% decline, but still 72.5%. That's a lot. Where is that decline concentrated? Well, it is absolutely concentrated among younger dentists. So if we look at some of these, the older cohorts here, 65 and older, 55, honestly, 45 to or 45 plus, those top three lines here, they're reasonably consistent. Yes, there are some slight declines here, 5%, 4%, 2%, but that's remarkable consistency. The major decline starts with the younger cohorts of dentists, those younger than 44, and specifically those younger than 34. And that's where we see these major declines, the major trends. So only 8.8% of dentists under 30 own practices. That means 91% are working as employees, working as associates. So who are they working for? Well, as you've probably guessed, one of the places they're working for are DSOs. This is a headline from the middle of 2023. So last year, DSOs are taking over the dental industry. But what are they? And so my first contention here is that taking over is a little bit exaggerated.
You
Now,
mean 10% is not taking over?
10% is not quite taking over. So yes, they generate a lot of headlines. Yes, they generate headlines because a $100 million deal is a more exciting headline than your $1 million deals that are happening every day with doctor-to-doctor transactions. But we're still talking about less than 10% of dentists affiliated with DSOs. What is a DSO? It's a dental service organization, and it's an answer to the question, how can I, as a non-dentist, invest in or own a dental practice? And so I could spend a whole webinar going through the kind of legal structure and the way that the money routes and all of the different pieces that make up a DSO. But functionally, it's going to be a kind of parent entity that handles all the practice administration, while there's a sub-entity that is hypothetically focused only on kind of clinical dentistry, where the patients are actually, where the goodwill is owned and this sort of thing. So parent organization that handles the practice administration. And in that organization, non-dentists can invest. And then there's ways that the money routes and all that. But the point is, or the idea, and it's a great idea, the idea is, let's let dentists focus on dentistry and let's let business people handle the rest. But as you're going to see, I don't think it's quite that simple. And I think that private practice ownership is actually one of the best opportunities available to dentists today, especially younger dentists. It represents, in one, I think, fairly conservative calculation that I have up on our blog at Integrity Practice Sales, a $6 million difference over the life, the career of a dentist between working as an associate and buying a practice. But the DSO, Dental Service Organization, absolutely on the ascendancy, right? We're seeing more and more headlines, and that number, while it's less than 10%, is growing, absolutely. So let's look at some of these numbers briefly. In the US, 13% of all dentists are affiliated with DSOs. In California, 9% of all dentists. But look how heavily it skews young. So if you're less than 5 years out of school, it's 30%. But if you're more than 25 years out of school, only 4%. So here I have a quote from that same article that I just provided the headline from. The DSO business model was created in 75, but didn't become popular until the 90s as dentists graduated with piles of student debt and found it hard to open their own practice, according to this consulting group. So there's a lot of truth in this. Unsurprisingly, student debt has been going up tremendously. I I don't know the exact figures, but Bill, when you were in dental school, I'm sure you didn't graduate with $300,000 of student loan debt.
I did not.
Yeah.
Yes, I did not. But 300,000 or 400,000 is pretty common these days.
Very common, very common. And so that is a major factor. Although today, what we're seeing is, yes, there are more DSOs because there are more associates, and there's a lot of different reasons why there are more DSOs. It's a very lucrative business model for the people founding the DSO, as we will see. But the rise in DSOs, I don't think is necessarily exactly related to that student loan debt. Absolutely, there are more associates, but let's take a look at the data here. And this was, I think, surprising to the researchers who ran this. Average debt upon graduation based on where someone is choosing to practice. So affiliated private practice, that's DSOs, that's the purple. And then that kind of teal color is unaffiliated, or what I would just consider your general average private practice, owner doctor practices. And while there is a difference there, it's not this remarkable, huge difference. Doctors are starting out in DSOs or going into DSOs, but debt is not the meaningful factor that is going to be the deciding force driving you into one practice modality, as they call it, or practice setting versus another one. So DSO associates don't really have more debt, statistically speaking. But debt is absolutely on the rise, and it is fueling this, what I would call a delay in practice ownership.
Trevor, I just spoke to the seniors at the Loma Linda Dental School, and gosh, they are being peppered with offers from DSOs. And so it's definitely the easiest entry just to go in. And I did find that probably 8% of the class was planning on graduating and buying a practice, and 90 plus was planning on taking one of those offers that they were being given.
Yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely. Absolutely. There are some other really interesting data that came out with this too. Are new dentists staying in DSOs? So this, I thought, was a very surprising disparity here. And it actually answers, I see a question here. I understand the trend is that new graduates will seek employment in DSOs. How long are they staying before trying to buy a practice? So, or get out of the DSO. So this actually answers that question exactly. So percentage of new dentists planning to leave current setting for a different practice setting. If you're in a DSO, 48% of the dentists that are starting out in DSOs are planning to leave, and 39% of all of those doctors are moving towards unaffiliated practices. That's practices that are owned by the doctor practicing there, or owned 100%, or without an affiliation with a DSO kind of parent company. Very different statistics than those doctors who start out working as an associate for another doctor who is not affiliated with the DSO, so non-DSO. Only 8% of those doctors are planning to leave, and 5% of that total are planning to move towards a DSO. So that's a statistically significant disparity right there. Now, why are they moving? Well, because they're happier. So here we have satisfaction with various aspects of current practice setting for new dentists, and across the board, I mean, workplace culture, career advancement opportunities, influence of business decisions, clinical autonomy, schedule flexibility. Across the board, the unaffiliated practices, that's those teal dots, doctors in those settings reported higher satisfaction than doctors in the DSO settings. So across the board, higher satisfaction. That's why they're leaving. Now, yes, ownership is declining, but it does seem like it's less of a total decline and more of a delay. Now, will these doctors who have all this debt, who've become associates first, finding their footing, trying to navigate the business environment today, are they going to be as associates forever, or are they looking to buy? I mean, my experience is that a lot of them are looking to buy. Right now, we have so many more qualified buyers than we have sellers in most geographical areas, certainly the major metro areas around California. And so I know that many, many, many of them are going to be looking to jump into private practice. Number two, the rise in the DSOs, absolutely there, very true. We see it in the numbers, but it's not this overwhelming dominance that you might think from the headlines. And finally, younger dentists are starting out in DSOs, but they're moving on. And so I think associate retention is going to be an issue moving forward with a lot of these groups. So trend number two, this is Dr. Marco. Just going to leave it there. He's the primary healthcare economist for the American Dental Association. And this was in a webinar 3 weeks ago. He says, we're about to see a big surge in retirements in the next 3 years, not 10 years, as the baby boomer cohort of dentists enters those big retirement years. So trend number two, more dentists than ever before retiring. Oops. So here we have the distribution of dentist ages in 2001. And you see here, this blue line about age 54, there's a decline that is pretty much sustained through the rest of this distribution. At 54, dentists start retiring. And by the age of 65, we see that most dentists are younger. Most dentists older than 65 who are practicing, there are far fewer of them here. The percentage of doctors practicing over 65 in the year 2001 is not very high. Excuse me. Compare that now to 2022, the most recent year that this data was available. So no meaningful drop-off at age 54. The first sustained decline really starts at age 65, unless we count this this kind of gradual slope here. But when it starts to drop off, age 65, and this percentage right here is considerably higher, I think, than the percentage on the be the right side of the kind of maroon line there. So a much higher percentage of doctors practicing into later age. The retirement age for dentists has gone up. More and more doctors are practicing for longer. There's all sorts of reasons for that, but what does that mean for the practice sales environment in 2024 and for the next handful of years to come? Well, it's supply and demand. If more doctors are retiring, that means the market is going to have more supply, which will drive down prices. Now, I don't want to, I'm not Chicken Little. I don't want to say that the sky is falling. I don't think this is going to be a disaster. One of the reasons that I think that, and I do think it's different now, but we've been predicting this for years. I mean, we've been looking at the same data and saying, okay, it's about to, it's been the seller's market for a long time. And I still think we're in a seller's market right now, at least in most major metro areas in California. And so we're in the seller's market, but if the market is flooded with more practices for sale, then it's going to become this buyer's market, and we see fewer buyers buying practices. I think there's going to be a pretty sustained equilibrium for a long time, but the balance of that supply and demand is going to shift. And we are seeing the beginning of that now. And if the ADA's healthcare economist, if Dr. Marco is correct, then we're going to see a lot of that even in the next 3 years. Like you said, 3 years, not 10 years. So this
would lowering
Yeah.
lowering interest rates then offset that? Do you think it would fully offset
Oh,
it, partially offset it?
That's a real question for I do not know. I suspect not. I suspect it would not fully offset, but that is coming from, that's a weakly held opinion. I think that and it makes perfect sense, right? If there are 10 buyers and 5 doctors trying to sell their practices, those practices are going to go for a premium. But if there are 5 buyers and 10 doctors trying to sell their practices, well, those buyers are going to get better deals. And so it's very straightforward, but that's what we're looking at right now. So in summary, dentists will continue to purchase quality practices despite debt and DSO opportunities. However, the retirement age can't continue increasing forever, And more doctors than ever are, I think, on the verge of retirement. So what does this mean? Well, doctors contemplating retirement should act soon. And how should you act? What options are available to you? Well, I'm glad you asked. But before we get into that, here's an image of a dentist deeply contemplating retirement and different retirement options. Thank you, ChatGPT. So let's get into the meat of this thing, exploring some transition options. We're going to do a comparison. We're going to compare 3 different practice models or practice transition models here. But before we do that, there are 2 concepts that I think we need to understand in order to see how those comparisons work. In order to understand the comparisons, there's 2 accounting concepts that we need. And so we're going to go over those. And at the end, there are 0 clear winners. Every practice is unique, and the best option for you depends on your individual goals. I grew up in dad's private practice, and his father practiced, and my folks met in dental school, and my other grandfather was in private practice. I mean, private practice is it's the air in which I breathe. I mean, that's the stuff that I've grown up with, and I have a lot of affection for it. And I think honestly, for most doctors out there, selling to another dentist is probably your best move. But if you're entrepreneurial, if you're thinking about the future, or if you want to absolutely maximize the value of your practice, or you want access to some different investments, or you want to really get into the game here, there are some great options for you as well. So there's 0 clear winners amongst these 3 options. Every practice is unique. The best option for you depends on your individual goals. And so we're going to walk through this, and let's get started. So 2 accounting concepts. First, some essential background. Practice valuation is, there are a lot of factors that go into it. It is complex. But the primary building block, the primary driver for valuation are going to be your past year's numbers. There's a lot of other factors that play into how we use last year's numbers or the last 3 years' numbers. So location, specialty, type of building, I mean, all sorts of factors going into this. But the primary building block of evaluation are going to be past year's numbers. So when we look at past year's numbers, there are really 3 essential accounting concepts that we need to know. The first one is revenue or collections, and I feel like everybody gets that. But that's money coming in. But the confusion, and there's so much confusion around this, and some people, even some CPAs, the way that they do their financial statements, I think doesn't help dentists see this. And so it's so important to understand these kind of 2 concepts here. And I think I've put together a pretty clear, albeit high level explanation of these 2 concepts. So I'm excited to share it with you. The first is SDE, or seller's discretionary earnings. And the second concept is EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So let's start off with our dentist. Here she is, and she's got her practice, and it's a great little practice. It's not even that little at all. It's a great practice. It's doing 1.2, collecting, single doctor practice, fantastic practice. She's paying $720,000 a year in necessary business expenses for the practice, leaving her with $480,000 of owner doctor profit. So let's break down that 720 and that 480 a little bit further. So necessary expenses, what's in that bucket? Well, staff, that's a huge one. Lab and supplies, facilities, that's rent, but also janitorial and security and any other expenses related to the facility, and other general expenses. This is your office supplies and your bank fees and your merchant services fees and that sort of thing. So all those types of charges make up your necessary expenses. Then let's look at the everything else bucket, that 480. So what's in that? Well, it's not just, you don't just get a check for 480. Instead, you're taking 180,000 in W-2 income. You're depreciating $85,000. You're spending 25,000 on your car and traveling to CE opportunities. And then your practice bottom line profit is 190. This is different for every dentist. Every dentist is going to have a different tax situation. They're going to pay themselves a different amount, if anything, on a W-2. They're going to depreciate on a different schedule. They might spend a lot on all of those expenses that are discretionary, so perfectly valid to run your car through your practice. But strictly speaking, you don't absolutely need a car to practice dentistry. You could take the bus. So all of these things together don't give us much information. They're not helpful for apples and apples comparisons. So that's why we add them all up into the everything else bucket, and we call this seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE. It's the everything else category. It's the, all right, if I forgot about all this stuff and my only goal was to take cash out of my practice, that is the max you could take out. Of course, that's a bad tax move. You need to pay yourself that W-2. You need to depreciate. Absolutely run your car, run business related travel, all these things through your business. But because every dentist is different with these, those numbers don't help us. So we clump them together and we call it seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE. And this is primarily applicable in practices doing, say, under $2 million or so. Generally, 1 or 2 doctor practices. That's what we're looking at. SDE. It's a really important concept for valuing owner-operated dental practices. But what if an outside investor wanted to buy the practice? Well, we'd start off with that 480 that was going to the owner dentist, but now we have to pay an associate because the investor can't do the dentistry or isn't going to do the dentistry. That's not what the investment's about. So 480 would go to an owner operator. That's seller's discretionary earnings. But in this case, let's say 850 is the amount that the doctor is producing, and they are being paid 30% of that production. And so the outside investor has to pay the dentist $255,000 to do the dentistry, leaving the investor with $225,000. That number is your EBITDA number, or earnings to an outside investor before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. EBITDA is basically the everything else bucket after paying for a dentist to do the actual dentistry. So EBITDA is there, associate salary, add those two together, and you get that seller's discretionary earnings. And for every dentist, you actually have an EBITDA number. You don't have to have an outside investor to have an EBITDA. Every business has EBITDA. It's just you take the total amount that you're able to take home. You take your seller's discretionary earnings. You look at your production. You say, all right, what would a standard associate salary be for this? Subtract it from your SDE, and what you're left with is your EBITDA. So every practice has EBITDA. In summary, and on the first go round of this webinar, I was told that this slide didn't have enough graphics, so I have overcompensated. But we take all the practice revenue, the money generated by patient care, we subtract those necessary practice expenses, and we get your seller's discretionary earnings. It's the everything else bucket, money available to a seller before paying themselves, an owner-operator seller. Then we subtract the dentist salary as an associate, so paying for the dentistry, and what we're left with is EBITDA, what an outside investor could expect to earn from the practice before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. So with those two key concepts in mind, let's get into some comparison. So here we have a dentist contemplating even more deeply about the different transition models in dental practices, or for dental practices, in 2024.
I want to try to find one of those desks, Trevor, that I can sit in my treatment chair and do my business work right there.
It's just
with
a
mirror
shop.
and explorer right there,
Yeah.
ready to go.
One-stop shop. All right, so the first thing I'd like to do is just compare a DSO offer with a private sale offer, because I want to introduce one idea that I think is going to provide a lot of clarity about the way that these deals are structured. So question number one, who is offering more? DSO comes and they're offering you 120% of collections. And this is, I think, generally a pretty high offer. And you might see this expressed as a multiple of EBITDA. But let's just say, for the sake of simple comparison, again, 30,000-foot view, the DSO is offering you 120% of collections, and a private buyer, another doctor, is offering you 80% of collections. Which is the better deal? Well, let's model it out. On the first take, it sure seems like that DSO offer is higher. 1.44 is higher than 960. Of course. But let's get into the details. So with the DSO offer, you are required to stay on for 3 years as an associate. You do need to hit some production targets. In fact, you only get 70% of that money up front, and the rest you get over time only if you hit those production targets. Okay. And then, boom, you're done. In the private offer, you get the money up front. What you see is what you get. There's no work requirements unless you want to continue working as an associate and your practice can support another doctor. So if that's the case, then actually becoming an associate in your old practice can be a phenomenal option for a lot of those doctors out there who are ready to slow down, but understand that slowing down will affect the value of their practice. And so the move is sell now, find a buyer who can come in and let you work 1 day a week, 2 days a week. And then you can kind of taper off on your own schedule without affecting the value of your practice. And the buyer gets a mentor and an associate that isn't going to go open up shop across the street. So it's a win-win. So that's an aside, but there are no work requirements in this particular offer, and you can retire. You're done. Practice closes, and the next day you're out on the lake, you're fishing, you're having a good time, you're on the golf course. So let's break this down a little bit. So here's our pre-sale year. This is the doctor we were just talking about before. So she's doing 1.2. Producing her production is 840,000, overhead is 720, and take home is 480. So in the sale to the DSO, boom, we're selling at the beginning, just over $1 million, 70%. Then the next 3 years, on the DSO offer, you're taking home your $255,000 associate salary, plus let's assume that you hit your production targets every year. So each year you get 10% more of that deal. So 144,000 this year. Then associate salary plus 10% more for hitting your production target. So 144 this year. Third year, 255 associate, 144 for hitting your production target. Fantastic. Now,
Trevor, there's a question about what's the 70%? Why did this doctor only get $1 million?
So this is one of those things where every DSO offer is different. And quite frankly, every DSO is different. And I am dramatically oversimplifying here in order to illustrate a point. And you'll see the point in just a second. But it's very typical to have a holdback or even what's called an equity rollover. And we'll look at that in a minute. But it's very typical to receive less than the full amount up front, because the idea is we want to align incentives here. The DSO doesn't want the practice to plummet, and so they want to incentivize you to keep working and make sure that you're going to stay in the driver's seat and keep moving and keep this practice moving forward, while they then incorporate it into their group and start finding associates and start staffing it and all these different things. So the idea is to align incentives, but functionally what it means for you is very rarely, if ever, are you going to get all of your money up front. Very, very rare. Some exceptions could be for a practice that's already associate run, and there's some other factors in there, but on the whole, you're not going to receive that full value up front. So in this one, I just arbitrarily chose 70%. So that's year 1, 2, and 3 for the doctor that sold to the DSO. The doctor that didn't sell, well, they're just continuing to work. So 480 in that pre-sale year 1, 480, year 2, 480, year 3, 480. Remember, they're working the same amount. This doctor is producing 840. This doctor is producing 840. But this doctor is just working. And then at the end now, they're going to sell to a private buyer for 960. What happens when we add it all up? Well, the doctor who sold to a private buyer for only 80% of collections, only, the 3-year value plus the sale is 2.4. And for the doctor that sold to the DSO for 120% of collections, holy moly, that's a great deal. The 3-year value after accounting for the whole structure of the deal is just over 2.2. And so my point here is very simple. Time is key when doing these comparisons. And something that's a big pet peeve of mine is when I hear someone say, oh, I sold my practice for 120% of collections, 130% of collections. And the reason I don't like it is because it just doesn't capture the whole picture. And I think for a lot of doctors, they think, oh my goodness, wow, that guy's selling it for this. Pump the brakes. We don't necessarily know what the whole structure of the deal is. And so, yes, there's a enterprise value. There's a value of the whole deal. If everything goes right and you continue doing this, then boom, you're doing this. But when the dentist that's selling to another doctor for 80% of collections, just say, I'm doing this for easy math. You think, oh, I only sold for 80. But when you look at the time, when you look at those 3 years altogether, when you model it out, you actually took home more. So my point here isn't that DSOs are bad. It's that comparisons have to be apples and apples. Apples and apples comparisons if you really want to get into this. And so here's here's an image of a dentist who is extremely ready to retire, capturing their anticipation and joy for the next chapter of their life. So yeah, good job. ChatGPT can't spell for images, so you know, it's a crazy world out there. But I don't want to give kind of shortchange the DSOs. So what are some of the benefits of the DSO? Well, I want to highlight 3 benefits here. One, being part of a larger group can lower your overhead. I didn't model that in. But if the DSO is buying it at the start, then lowering the overhead really just benefits the DSO. It doesn't benefit you. But being part of a larger group can lower overhead. It can be a lower cost to acquire patients, so optimizing marketing, insurance negotiation, supply costs, new equipment, new technology. All of that can be less expensive when you have a larger group buying it. You have more power to negotiate with suppliers and that sort of thing. So it can help you lower overhead. It can absolutely help with practice management. So all those pieces, all those administrative burdens that you experience as a private practice owner, they can help you remove that. Now, caveat here as well, you're still going to have to provide a leadership role in your practice, and you don't get to just step back. And a lot of doctors that I've spoken to find that transition into becoming an employee, you know, the transition from ownership to being an employee, really jarring, especially when it's, you know, it's a new culture that has come in. It's a new group of people. Now you're driving to work because someone told you you had to be there, not because you're driving to work because it's your practice and you're going to work. So it's a different mindset, but the DSO can absolutely help you optimize aspects of practice administration and take care of a lot of those kind of annoying, burdensome administrative tasks for you. And the third benefit, and this can be a big one, and this one's hard for me to model in the time that we have now, but you get the opportunity, or in many cases, the requirement to invest. And so this is what's called an equity rollover. And the basic idea is, okay, let's say you get 70% of the cash value of your offer, but let's say the next 30% is going to get rolled into the group, the DSO. And so now you're invested in this DSO. This isn't something that Joe Schmo off the street can come and invest in. This is a special investment. And if you believe in this DSO and you believe in its mission, that 30% has an opportunity now to be a great investment for you. Now, if the DSO doesn't go well, the leadership fails to capitalize on it, and that money can either sit there for a long time or disappear. But it can also be great. It's an opportunity. So it's an opportunity, and in many cases, a requirement to invest in something that is essentially off market. It's not available to the average public. Now I'm going to pause for a brief second. Bill sold his practice in '95 to become a consultant and has worked with over 1,000 offices as a consultant. And I've been doing that with him as well for, gosh, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years now, something like that. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that joining a DSO isn't the only way to get help for lowering overhead and practice management. There's a lot of great consultants out there who can help you. There are groups to help you with IT. There's some incredible accountants out there. There are all sorts of great financial planners, advisors. There's you can pull together an incredible team that can really help you take that burden off of you. And the question is, okay, great. So I want to pull together a great team. How much money do I have to spend? That sounds expensive. Well, in this scenario, you're giving the DSO your EBITDA, $225,000 a year. So I'm just
So
saying,
Trevor, you could probably get all of those things for
I
less than
suspect you
225
could get all of those
a
things for
year.
less than $225,000 a year.
And I was talking to a dentist last night who was evaluating a DSO program, and she said she wanted to take 4 weeks off. She always does that. She wanted to take 4 weeks off, and the person telling her about the DSO said, "Well, no, you will take 3 weeks off." And I think it's just you'll take 3 weeks off when we tell you you'll take 3 weeks off. And she said, "No, I want to negotiate. I want 4 weeks off." And they said, take it or leave it. We do 3 weeks off. That's how we do it. And she just didn't like the idea of having that dictated to her. Or, what if you hate this hygienist that they bring in, and she's not a very good hygienist, but she sells a lot, so they bring her in, and you have to work with that hygienist. So,
Yeah.
but she did choose our Model 3, and you're going to talk about the Model 3 right now.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. So, quickly, I want to go over how a DSO operates and how the DSO from the 30,000-foot view makes money. So, DSO leadership founds a DSO, either starting with their own practices or an acquisition. They purchase practice and integrate them one by one. So, if you're receiving an offer from a DSO, that's because they're trying to pull you into their group and integrate you into their group. And then the DSO founders, once the group is large enough, are going to want to sell to private equity. So, what does that look like? Well, you start the DSO, you buy single practices for say 4 to 6 times EBITDA, and then once you build the large group, you sell it for 10 to 15 times EBITDA. This process is a ton of work. I'm not saying for a second that the people that are putting these together are not earning that delta right there. Like that's a lot of work to buy and integrate all these practices. But who's the benefit going to? In most instances, it's going to the DSO founders. You might have some investment in that group that's then going to sell for 10 to 15 times. But it's only going to be a small percentage of the value you received for your practice in most cases, or you're going to receive most of the value for your practice either in cash or in subsequent payouts, and you're not going to be able to roll over as much as you might want to in that group. Also, that's quite risky because if the DSO doesn't perform and that doesn't materialize, then you're not left with anything at all. So I want to highlight here that the value is in a large integrated group. This garish puzzle image here, the idea, you can't just throw together 100 practices and say, look, we have a DSO. You just have 100 practices. And each one is going to have all of its own systems and all of its own accounting and all it's just a big group of practices. The value is in number one, the integration. So all of these practices have to look, smell, feel like a single entity. So it means that they have to have unified accounting. It means that they have to have some systemization around just the reporting aspects, the KPIs. They need to be routing the money the correct way through the banks. They need to be all under the correct kind of legal arrangements. And so it has to be a big integrated group. And the size is also crucial. Private equity investors consider larger operations less risky for obvious reasons. There's just more opportunity for failure not to sink the whole thing. And so larger entities considered less risky, but in order to qualify as a large entity, as a single large entity, it has to be fully integrated. So large group and integrated group are the two keys. So a standard DSO model is a vertical integration. That means just one at a time. So by practice one, and you're updating software, payroll, legal, accounting systems. By practice two, you're doing software, payroll, legal, accounting systems, and et cetera. So you're adding and going. And so our question today is there a better way? Well, I think that there might be. And I did say at the beginning that there are no clear winners. And I think that's very true because it depends on every single practice that is out there, and every doctor has a different set of goals. And our job at Integrity Practice Sales as advisors, our first job is to listen to you and help you clarify the future that you want, and then be there in a position to help you figure out the best path to get to the future that you want. So no clear winners here. And on the DSO side, if you've met one DSO, you've met one DSO. It's not, there are so many different types. There's different strategies. There's so much variation in there. So I'm not poo-pooing the whole thing. And I also said at the beginning, I think for a lot of doctors, that doctor-to-doctor sale, retirement, that is a fantastic way to go. But if you're entrepreneurial and if you want to get involved in this kind of thing and you want to absolutely maximize your practice value and you're excited about forming groups and that sort of thing, I think there may be a better way. So think about a subdivision. Does it make more sense? Is it cheaper? If you want to go through, is it more efficient to build houses one by one? Or do you want to bring in the excavators and do all the grading at once? And then bring in the foundation guys and do all the foundations at once? And then bring in the framers and frame everything at the same time? That's how they build subdivisions. It makes a lot more sense to do it that way than it does to build one complete house and then have that same team go over and start again. We're going to bring the excavators in, we're going to grade, we're going to do foundation, build another complete house. It's if that's how you have to do it, that's how you have to do it. But if there's another way, that's absolutely preferable. So today we are introducing our alliance model. And the alliance is a group that we have kind of helped put together at Integrity Practice Sales, but we have brought together a team. It's a team of people with a lot of experience in the private equity space and a lot of experience in the DSO spaces, as well as a team with a lot of experience consulting for large practices. This is, practices doing $6, $7, $8 million who don't work with individual dentists, but are only going to be working with this group. Marketers, we've brought together a whole group. And I think that we're offering something that is truly unique on the market today. There are other ways to kind of bring doctors together to found their own DSOs, but I think ours is the fastest, the cheapest, and has the potential for by far the most profit to you with some of the least risk and downside, because you're not selling and then waiting for that private equity. You're becoming a DSO. You're forming this alliance through a process of horizontal integration, and then selling 100% of your practice to that private equity for that 10 to 15 times EBITDA. So how does this work? Well, first, we're in the recruiting stage right now. We have doctors actually signed on who have signed LOIs, who are part of this group. And we are talking to a ton more. So now is the moment to at least get in touch with us and let us walk you through the details. But let me give you that again, 30,000 square foot view. We bring a bunch of doctors together. They decide to form a group. Then our team goes through system by system. So instead of doing software, payroll, legal, accounting systems in one practice, and then software, payroll, legal, accounting systems in another practice, we're going to do software across all practices, payroll across all practices, legal across all practices, and it's not necessarily in that order, but I'm trying to describe what makes this so fast and efficient in terms of our ability to form something that looks, smells, and feels like a DSO while you still own 100% of your practice through that entire process of integration. You own it. And so we go through that. And then once this group looks, smells, and feels like a DSO, we take it to private equity. The partners, and this is 100% doctor-led, right? So we're going to tell you what practice software you can use, which enterprise softwares are available to DSOs, but you're going to vote and choose the one that you want. And the same goes for some of these things. And it's plug and play. We have the legal structure set up. We have the banking relationships in place. We have the accountants who can, it has to be accrual accounting, it has to be all these different things. And so this is the fastest way to take your practice from a single owner-operated dental practice into a group, integrated and large enough to go to private equity for 10 to 15 times EBITDA. So let's look at what this looks like functionally here. Alliance year 1, Alliance year 2, that's where you own the practice. And then boom, at the end of that second year, or really we're kind of targeting 18 months, you're going to sell to private equity. And let's say it's 12 times EBITDA, for a $2.7 million sale price. And then you are gonna work as an associate, most likely for around 3 years, but it will be for a DSO that you helped create, where you help drive the culture, you help build the systems. You were a founding member. And so I think it's going to feel very different than trying to plug yourself into someone else's world, someone else's culture, someone else's systems. This is going to be something that you're familiar with. It's your practice and you help build. So then you work for a few years and you're done. So what is the totals here? Well, 2 years working as a owner, 960, sale amount, 2.7, 3 years as an associate, 765, for a total of 4.425 million. So if you are truly keen on maximizing the overall value of your practice, I think this is the best way to absolutely maximize value. If you're ready to retire, or you say, look, I don't want to deal with this private equity stuff. I don't want to join others. Doctor to doctor sales are amazing. And if you're thinking, this seems like I've actually been talking to this DSO and they seem great. And I really love the leadership and I like what they're doing. And it seems like they've got some really great programs that I like. And this deal makes sense. Man, do that. Do that. But for most, I think, entrepreneurial dentists who are wanting to essentially retire before 2030, that's what we're looking at right now, is retire before 2030. I think this represents the best opportunity to absolutely maximize the value of your practice. What are some of the benefits? Well, like I was just saying, it's a real increase in practice value. Like I mentioned, there's a professional consulting team to help you grow your EBITDA before selling it. So part of that integration process is, all right, let's refine your systems. Let's lower your overhead with the supply. With a normal DSO, that lower overhead, the benefit of that typically goes to the DSO because they're receiving the EBITDA and you're being paid as a dentist. But in this instance, any decrease in your overhead is going to mean more EBITDA for you, one, to take home before the sale, and two, to maximize whatever multiple you end up receiving for the group, maximize that multiple. So, and like I said, this professional consulting team has a ton of experience. The leader of this just worked in, but grew a practice, I think, from $2 to $8 million in 3 years. Like a lot of experience in that really large space. Like I was saying, you help shape the group identity and culture. And then, like I was saying as well, the plug and play process is faster, less expensive, and less risky. All the pieces are in place. This group has done it before. And so we are introducing this to California. And so we are very excited to be kind of the exclusive people offering this particular alliance. And we look forward to speaking with you about it. I also want to highlight this. I've been trying to do very like apples, conservative comparisons. And we're going to end this webinar with a comparison of all three models. But let's just dream for a second here. Let's assume 20% growth in year 2. Let's assume that this, between the changes made by the consulting group, we get 20% growth. So your revenue is 1.44. But let's assume that your hygiene, also your perio program expanded as a percentage of your practice, and talk about general dentists here, but we do actually have some opportunities for a small handful of specialists inside of this alliance. So your doctor production, let's say, is 966. It goes up 15%. Let's say your overhead goes up only 10% because of all of the value brought by the group here. So, and the cost savings to you in terms of supplies and all of these other pieces. So your SDE actually goes up to 648. That's not unreasonable. And we do this for owner doctor practices all the time on the consulting side. And so that I find that very believable. Owner doctor goes up to 648, which means your EBITDA goes up to 358. I don't know where that 200 came from, but ignore the 200. Your EBITDA goes up to 358. And now you get that 12x multiple. Now the offer is just under 4.3. And you're working as an associate through this period here, taking home 289. The total value of this, 6.3. So again, huge potential opportunities. Now let's finalize this with an apples to apples timeline, because my original were for 3 years, and then I modeled the alliance on 5 years. Always check the time. And so let's look at 5 years across all of these. Doctor to doctor sale, 2 times SDE, Huh. I changed the slide right before I came out, but I guess it didn't change. That's all right. So 3.36 for the doctor to doctor, 3.165 for the DSO at 120% of collections. That 2 times SDE is the same as 80% of collections in the model here. And now let's look at the alliance, 12 times EBITDA, 480, 480. And then I did split it up here, 70 and 30. So 1.89, 255, 255, 255. And if there is an equity rollover as part of that deal, which is likely, just like there is with any DSO deal, instead of then investing in a single DSO, you're now investing in a much less risky, huge DSO that's being taken to market by a private equity company already. So where the DSO is probably trying to get to private equity, in this case, they're already there and being shepherded into an even larger deal. And so total here is 4.425. 4.425 here, 3.36 here, 3.165. But that is assuming no growth. So over $1 million more, assuming no growth. It was 6 point whatever it was, assuming some growth there. So if you want to spend time and do some work to absolutely maximize the value of your practice, then I think that this alliance represents the best opportunity for any dentist in California today to do that. If you're ready to retire tomorrow, talk to us. We do dental doctor to doctor sales all day long. We love it. Bill.
There's a question, who steps in to do the work when I actually leave and retire? The dentist is asking. How would an associate be calculated into this formula to make them a partner?
Okay, so I feel like there's a few sort of questions there, but the first one is just if we look back, let's look at this slide here. Year 1, year 2, year 3. In that time, the larger company is going to be working on staffing this practice with another doctor. So you're going to commit to X number of years, but they're going to be working to put an associate in there when you're done, and probably a period of overlap there as well. And so the idea is when you retire here, there's just another associate that's a true employee that's come in and is working. Darren, I see you raised your hand. Do you want to take this one?
Sure thing. So I've talked with Scott Cruz, the guy who's handling private equity bidding at the end of the process. And what they've done, what they've seen previously is that the dentist who's retiring actually has a big input. They rely on that dentist actually to find somebody to replace him or her.
Yeah. But I'm sure that they're offering resources to help recruit people. It's just that mentorship piece and that finding the right fit to step into your shoes in the practice that you've built and have sold.
Absolutely.
And that also leans to the flavor. It leans to the flavor of this alliance as opposed to another DSO where they might just say, this is the person who will be taking over for you. Take it or leave it. I mean, not even take it or leave it. It's just this is who'll do it. So again, the alliance is a softer, warmer environment to deal with.
I think that is the case. At the very least, I don't know about how soft and warm private equity is, but you choose the offer, and so at the end of that process, there's a full bidding place where we take our team takes the group that has been created to maybe 12 different private equity firms, and then let's say 10 of those want to bid, and so those firms are going to fly out. All the doctors are going to meet, and those firms are each going to make their pitch. Here's what we're willing to offer you. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's why we think that we're the best strategic partners for this. And then at the end, the dentists are going to vote on which offer they accept. So that's how that process works. Darren, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the big picture to look at here is that it's the dentist DSO, the participants in the alliance are the ones that are creating the culture. And to a large degree, I think they can expect that culture to remain over time. There's an old adage, why mess with success? And if it's successful, the private equity firm isn't gonna toy with that.
Yeah. Another kind of technical reason I think why what you're saying is correct is that if they buy, say, a smaller group, and we're aiming for 10 million in EBITDA for this group, 10 million total. If they buy a smaller group, say 2 million for, let's say, 8 times EBITDA or 7 times EBITDA or something like that, that group is typically going to be plugged into a larger group. And so they're going to be plugged in, and the larger group's kind of culture is going to be the dominant. But with 10 million in EBITDA, it's far more likely that that's going to be the primary group, and any smaller groups are going to get plugged into that one. So, excuse me, I think that that is one of the kind of technical reasons on that, why we can expect that the culture that you build as part of the Alliance will carry on. Thank you all so much for joining us. That was our webinar, and the big question at the end here is, what's best for you? Like I said, every model has its benefits. Which model is best depends 100% on what you're aiming for, what your practice is about, what future you see for yourself, and what kind of a journey you're willing to go on. And so it's up to you. But if you would like our team to plug your practice numbers into our model that has all three side by side here, we would be very happy to do that. So please reach out to us. Like I said, we have a full-on Excel document. We will plug your practice numbers in and walk you through, answer all of your questions, get into the nitty-gritty as nitty-gritty as you want to go. We'll go there with you, and we would be honored to help you get to the future that you see for yourself. So you set the goals, and our job is to help you get there. So there's an easy way to get connected here, 3 easy steps. Visit our website, integritypracticesales.com, enter your zip code, and you'll automatically be connected with your local advisor. There's the zip code up top on the website. So head over there and enter your zip code. You'll be connected with your local advisor and reach out to them. Of course, you're also very welcome to reach out to myself, Bill, or Darren. Here are our cell phone numbers, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you again so much for joining me on a Friday morning. It was a pleasure being here with all of you, and I look forward to connecting with as many of you as possible. Awesome. I'm super excited. Bill or Darren, any final thoughts, last words?
I
Thanks
think
for
it was
joining
well
us.
covered.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Good job, Trevor.
Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you being here, and yeah, let's do it. So here's to a great 2024 and beyond for all of you and your practices. And if you'd like for us to help you achieve that future that you have envisioned for yourself, or honestly even help you dream about what's possible for you in your practice, give us a call. We would love to help. And I've already had doctors reaching out to me, and it's been really nice. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you. All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Good weekend. Thank you.
Yeah.